Hello, chess fans. I'm broadcasting to you from the banks of the mighty Mississippi River. I'm down in my basement battle bunker right now, where I do my hobbies: painting toy soldiers and wargaming. Play Warhammer. I play historical miniatures. So I can be down here in the peace and solitude of the battle bunker playing bad chess for you to witness. I am playing Pierre today. It's a chess.com bot rated 1500. It's in the advanced category. It's the last of the three 1500 bots that start that category out. Once I'm done with Pierre, I'll move on to the next bot, which will be rated 1600. I'm going to start with white, as I am against all these bots. I'm just going to play white and keep beating them until we hit a bot that gives me problems. So I begin d4. I'm a d4 player. It's the second best by test, to make a pun on Bobby Fischer's comment that e4 is best by test. Pierre is supposed to be a tricky $1,500 rated bot, which is fine. And even in the copy for that bot, chess.com says Pierre likes to touch his f-pawn, and of course we see that right away here with the Dutch defense. I play the first same 5 moves against every... Oh, see, now it's getting ridiculous. It's getting ridiculous early. He's playing some bizarre gambit right into the teeth, really, of my opening, whose entire purpose and raison d'etre, pardon my poor French, is to prevent black from playing e7, e5. But yet here Pierre goes ahead and ventures it. A very foolish move, in my opinion. A losing move. I have a number of options to capture, of course. You see we can capture with my d-pawn, or we can capture on e5 with the knight, which would put the knight in a very aggressive square. He could kick the knight later with d6, and I would have to retreat. There is also this move. So let's consider that for a moment. By moving the f-pawn and the e-pawn, black has exposed his queen, also potentially his king, although that has not been the avenues my opening opens up. I don't play d4 and knight f3 to get quick attacks. Instead, what I'm trying to do is get a share of the center and get my king side pieces developed, and then my king castled into safety in the corner. The usual moves that I play the first 5 moves against everything, is 1 d4, then knight to f3, then e3, and then bishop e2. Not bishop d3, bishop e2. That's the signature move of my opening system, and then castle. However, we do have to deviate when our opponent requires us to deviate. If our opponent insists on losing the game in the opening, we must oblige them. So I have a drink kit. This is zero sugar blueberry pomegranate flavor. All right, enough jabbering here in the opening. Let's come down to some concrete analysis. Well, we'll take a look at the check to the black queen, so to speak. Obviously, black has a number of ways to defend that attack on the queen, by interposing one of the minor pieces, either the knight or the dark squared bishop. Most likely I would end up having to trade off my dark squared bishop for that minor piece, and I don't think that really benefits me. Just to help him develop and then trade off a piece doesn't work. So we're gonna capture this pawn. But look, if I do play, let's go through the calculation again. I mean, I do a lot of these positional analysis, but my weak point is lack of calculation. If he does play, if I play bishop g5, right? Let's get the arrows going. I have my mouse pad down here, but I'm still struggling with the mouse for some reason. Okay, g5, right? Bishop g5 on this square. Okay, if he does play knight f6, then I have pawn takes pawn followed by pawn takes knight. The knight can't move away because the queen is pinned by my bishop. So that would force bishop e7. So let's go through it. I'm struggling with the arrows. Very big apologies. Usually I'm very good with these arrows. I play bishop g5. Black must respond with bishop to e7, interposing. Now black has formed a battery with the queen and the bishop and is forcing my bishop to make a decision. Suppose I trade off. Then the queen probably recaptures, defending this pawn, sort of. Yeah, I'm not going to do these complications. I'm going to play simple chess. And I'm going to, I believe, capture with, let's say if I put the knight there now. The knight is attacking a very sensitive square on f7. d6 will come and chase the knight away. Then this light squared bishop will be biting against this pawn. If black tries to develop knight c6, I could trade, and that would double a pawn that could or could not benefit me. Oh boy, it's a difficult decision. What is the best way to do this? There is a check in this in the position for black. We should always look at the checks and captures. This check should be absolutely meaningless because I have several responses. But it could come. Could happen. If I take with the E pawn, now I've got a half open file on the D, yeah? The pawn is hanging out there a little bit. It can't be easily supported by another pawn. So that will give black the possibility to start trying to counterattack. Or like I said, just play, extend the gambit. So most likely I would take pawn takes pawn. Black would extend the gambit. I take the pawn here after black plays d6. And then bishop takes pawn. Now the bishops, at least one of the bishops is developed here. It doesn't make very much sense because the f5 pawn blocks the light squared bishop, as I mentioned before. So black is not really getting that rapid development that one would want and expect. However, if I take knight takes pawn, I can keep my pawn chain intact. Pawns like to be next to each other because they can provide mutual support to each other as they advance up the board. I'm going to do that. Given this offers too much complexity and I'm not familiar with it, I'm going to simply take the E pawn. I'm expecting d6 now, and there it is. Now I'll just retreat the knight and say thank you for the pawn. Look at this terrible state of affairs Pierre has got himself into. Both his bishops are hemmed in by his pawns. I give a little chuckle. I still reserve again now this bishop g5 move, but black wants to stop that. It's debatable whether it was any good. I can now return to my system after just a little segue and play e2, e3, which I might do simply because that's what I'm used to. I don't necessarily need to punish black further, even though he's arguably in a vulnerable position right now, because I already have a position that with best play I believe is winning. So we will continue with the plan. One advantage to getting this bishop out earlier would have been, and I didn't think of this at the time. Now I'm planning to play e3. But if I had tried this queen check earlier, a few moves earlier, and exchanged for the bishop, then I could have got in e2, e3 without blocking in my dark square bishop, because my dark square bishop would have wandered off and already exchanged itself off the board. However, the plan in my system is an eventual fianchetto of the bishop to the long dark square diagonal, which is very juicy at the moment because this F move has weakened the diagonal just a little bit. The pawns have a little harder time coordinating the defense. But we will play e2, e3. We're going to hold our cards tight to our chest. Now, the signature move, but Pierre is playing like a wild man. Yeah, he played knight on b to d7. The knight there dominated by my pawn. Not clear where he wants to go with this knight. Perhaps he's going to try and fianchetto this way. Maybe eventually play this, or play this right away. This pawn now is sitting there wide open, so I could move bishop to d3 with tempo. Then he can't so easily play c5 because I'll take the free pawn. Well, I'm getting out of my opening system. Pierre has played so badly that he has forced me to make good moves. I don't know what else to say. Pierre has forced me to make good moves in the opening. And that's not particularly my style. All right. Now he's giving me the pawn outright. All this pawn grabbing does risk getting me behind in development. However, he's not aggressively placed, which one would expect for the cost of pawns. I really didn't even see what the compensation is at all that he got. We're going to take the pawn because we're pawn grabbers. He will probably castle kingside and have this half-open file. That is some compensation. One idea is I'll take this pawn, and then maybe even just drop the knight off. I'll talk about it at the time why I like to trade bishops for knights in many situations where other players might not. And continue. He could try to work up some sort of kingside attack with this arrangement. f5 not particularly helping again. Probably wants to put the bishop on the long light squared diagonal. I can defend the knight this way. So we'll take the free pawn. Now I'm up the material equivalent of 2 pawns. Here comes c5. We thought that might be the ulterior motivation for playing knight on b to d7 earlier, as discussed. I can ignore it, or I could trade off the knight because I'm material ahead. Just take material off. I can continue with my opening in spite of it all, and castle. There's no particular exigency that says I have to trade this bishop right away. He's likely to develop the bishop that way, so that would help him develop. If pawn comes, then I'll take this way, probably. I'll take with my e3 pawn taking on d4. That will open the diagonal once again for my bishop, which has been a thematic element of my opening that I've discussed at some time. So I create this strong point on d4, and then if exchange comes, I can recapture with the e pawn, and that means my dark square bishop has a new lease of life on this c1 to h6 diagonal, and I don't have to go through the formalities of a fianchetto, which takes 2 moves. Castles, we're going to continue with. We're not going to get swept up into this hysteria. Now he's bringing the knight in. Always a good idea to consider what has just happened with your opponent's move. So he moved the knight to the b6 square. He played knight b6. That opens or unmasks his light squared bishop, which is now threatening to capture my undefended bishop. Undefended pieces drop off. Also, the knight has jumping options into d5 and can jump also into c4, and from there it's not clear what, if anything, he might be threatening. Perhaps something like this, but it seems that he can be easily fended off with these pawns. They will advance with their spears held firmly behind their shields and stab to the side. That's the way I was taught as a child to visualize pawns, holding a shield directly in front of them and stabbing with a spear to either side. And thus defending each other, just like the warriors of old, of ancient times. I have a capture here that would eventually to recapture here, and queens come off, which benefits me because I'm up material. So let's take this bishop off though, because that's the first item of business. Now I can take this pawn if I want to. I'm more inclined to just continue my development. If I take this pawn, black will probably recapture with his d pawn. That will give me an open file, at least temporarily, although black will be able to challenge along it. I really don't mind opening up one file in this particular situation. Sometimes white doesn't necessarily want to do that because one file open is a highway to piece exchanges. The heavy pieces come off, the rooks and the queens, and that can sometimes suck all the energy out of a position. And white usually wants to keep the tension after having had the advantage of the first move, and doesn't want wholesale trades of pieces. But since I'm up material here, the equivalent of 2 pawns, then I don't mind all the exchanges I can get, as long as it doesn't compromise my position. But I want to keep developing, because if I don't, I get into trouble. Really one of the philosophical justifications for my whole opening system, where I play d4, where I play e3, knight f6, I play bishop to e2, not to d3, the more active square, and I castle. The whole idea is get myself developed as rapidly as possible. That's about as fast as you can develop the king side. And then it's very important, since the whole queen side is undeveloped, to get that into the game, usually by c4, usually by knight c3, then b3, then fianchetto the bishop to the b2 square and the long dark square diagonal. That is the usual pattern, and what gets played maybe 7 or 8 games out of 10. So I want to continue my development. I have lost games before because I've gotten carried away. I've gotten carried away with bizarre play on behalf of my opponent, just like bizarre play the Pierre is doing here, as advertised. Chess.com said Pierre plays weird moves. I don't want to get sucked into that and then have it suddenly backfire on me. I'm thinking capture. Okay, now there's a whole possibility here. Then probably b3 and fianchetto, and because I've moved the pawn on d4 away for this capture, then the black will have a free rein on a very dangerous diagonal. The dark squared bishop. Let's have a drink here. If I had a beer, this is time to have a beer. Kind of making mountains out of molehills here, but at least you can hear my stream of consciousness for what it's worth. That and 50 cents will get you on the New York subway system, or what's it? A cup of coffee and a subway token will get you in the New York metro system back when they had tokens. I can triangle. That's a little too passive and takes away the best. See, the triangle would be here. Okay. That would be the triangle, but it takes away my white knight's best development square. The preferred plan A for developing the knight on b1 is to put it on c3. Usually we move the c pawn first, so a knight on c3 is not blocking the c pawn, but there are times in various opening systems where knight on c3 is played even before touching the c pawn. Also, I could continue with my general setup system, just play general here to c4, but we can see if I can get the highlight working. Yeah, the problem is, boom, okay? The knight is on an unusual square. Bad things happen when pieces are on unusual places. That's when we make tactical errors. I could make a perfunctory move like pawn c2 to c4, and all of a sudden I've given back a pawn for nothing because I just didn't consider that the knight is on a square that it rarely ever sees. b3 is strong here because it puts a pawn 2 squares away from this knight, preventing the knight from eventually dropping into either c4 or a4. The pawn 2 squares from right dominates a knight. It's a very powerful prophylactic tool. If black decides to capture, then he will have an isolated pawn on d6. I'm going to delay the development of my knight, even though the Russian schoolboys are told to develop knights before bishops. Instead, bring my bishop to the long dark square diagonal. And then I'm probably going to have to develop my knight to the d2 square, unfortunately, because it's not particularly active, but then I can maybe work for pushing c2, c4. So the idea, possible embryonic idea here is bishop to b2, knight to d2, rook comes over to c1, and c4. Okay? And then I'll have two pawns powerfully supported by other pawns in the center. And we can play attrition all we want, like I said earlier, because I'm up in material. Black can no longer fight a war of attrition. There is now, because black played d7, d5, there is now this, which is somewhat annoying, because it's striking at the top of this very small pawn chain. However, the pawn will not be able to advance further because I have the c3 square very well controlled by a knight and a bishop. So continue. Okay, let's continue our development. Black is now castled kingside, totally legal. The knight has come to the half-open file. That's dangerous. I admit that's dangerous for Pierre. He could eventually sacrifice or exchange that rook if he can get some sort of pressure against these pawns. The exchange sacrifice would remove my best defender on the king side, my f3 knight, and could give him attacking chances. Play pawn takes pawn now isolates his d5 pawn. He would probably recapture with the bishop. He might recapture with the queen. Either way, it's biting on granite, because the c5 square comes down to my e3 pawn, which is strongly supported. The automaton move, as I mentioned earlier, is simply to play the knight b to d2. Knight b to d2 completes the development of my minor pieces. The next stage then would be to relocate my queen to find a good square for her. Perhaps here on e2, the light squares, but since black is missing a light squared bishop, and so am I, so the queen would cover some important squares. Also, she would be on the second rank, which tends to be a good defensive posture, because it adds to the line of defense in front of the king. If I play knight, oh look, the queen is on here. I didn't really see that. I'm not paying attention particularly. The queen is behind this c5 pawn. And why is that important? Well, because it can push. And it's playing quite nicely into his bizarre development, because his knight, his queen, and the d pawn on d5 support this advance, c5 to c4. His pieces are, despite these bizarre moves, coordinated in that sense. And I don't want to capture back this way. I still can't, however, play c4 because of this knight. the, the, the square is defended, and I'll lose a pawn. Is losing a pawn a bad thing? I could pin the knight. Yeah, here's the issue. Here's the issue, Pierre. You moved your f-pawn. You moved it away, which means there's a check, okay? There's a check on this diagonal. So let's go through it. Let's suppose I played adventurously. I played c2, c4. He thinks he's going to win a pawn. He captures. I capture. The knight captures. Now look, my queen comes to b3. The knight is pinned on this against the king on the c file. He can defend the knight with a pawn. Now the knight is outposted on the c4 square. If he tries to defend that way, I can capture with the queen, but then maybe the rook will come to that file, and look, my bishop is skewered. And look at all these arrows. I think it's too much complication in a position. If black plays c4, I might just have to play something like c3. Or I could exchange it off now. Just exchange it off. Exchange it off. I will have a backward pawn on c2, down a half open file. Pretty confident I can defend that easily, even just pushing it. I can defend it. I can put firepower behind it. I'm gonna just take this pawn. I don't want it advancing, and I don't want his pieces coordinating. He recaptured with the queen. The other option was the bishop. As I noted, the queen biting on granite. That's an expression from Nimzovich, because it's looking directly at a very entrenched e3 pawn. This diagonal is now open. I reserve the option to exchange off another knight for the bishop. However, that would bring his bishop to a very strong file. Is there any way I could take advantage of the fact that this queen is rather exposed? And the answer is yes. I can play bishop a3. Now, he can't exchange the bishop because it'll be a queen for two pieces. So he's going to have to move his queen away. Let's just not consider that for a moment. But if he moves his queen away, then boom. Okay? Then I've taken off another piece. The more pieces I take off, the weaker this isolated pawn becomes. Yes, yes, yes. It has two knights defending it. Yes, yes, yes. I agree. I can move to a knight to the blockading square. The knight is the best blockading piece. That's a thought. Just continue to trade the pieces this way. That's a thought. I still haven't developed my knight on b1, which is making me nervous, a little anxious, because you lose games when you don't develop your pieces. Let's do it. I think it's I got to be careful of. This is coming. Okay, this is coming. But now let's be a little more concrete. Bishop to a3. Queen can't take it. Queen really can't find any targets, so it's going to have to go back to protect this bishop. It's going to have to go back to c7. Then the trade comes. Boom, boom. Or not. I could just leave it on the board. Notice the bishop is pinned. The rook is pinned. So black would be likely to try and force that exchange. That would bring my knight to a3. I could move it to b5 where there's a queen hanging on the end. Let's do this. I want to get the queen off this file, okay? So that's what we're doing. The queen's off the c file now, okay? So this little backwards pawn, I have a slight breathing space. I still want to play the move. c2, c4. I can do that by placing a bishop here. It's knights against knights now. I feel much more comfortable playing knights myself, but I don't like when my opponents have knights. I have trouble properly calculating the dangers posed to me by an enemy knight, particularly one outposted either on a central square, like he will. He's going to come here, okay, or anywhere in my position. I try to play around them instead of deal with them directly, and sometimes I'm punished. I got to be careful because the rook is a little vulnerable, a little naked here. If somehow black were to be able to get to this long dark square diagonal, it could be a problem. Can't do it now, obviously, because then my knight is here. So I want to, the next stage is develop this knight. I could come here. It looks funny blocking my c-pawn. We're going to go here. Yep, now he comes. We expected this. It's an outposted knight. You know what I'm going to do? I'm material ahead. Even exchanges benefit me. Yes, he will be able to move this weakness to a square where it's less weak. Pawns are weak because they can be attacked. If the pawn cannot be attacked, then it is not weak. Much harder for me to attack the pawn here. But I can by moving knight here, here. So we're just going to exchange, okay? I still have to be careful. Okay, now the knight has to move. I'm looking at my options. This is a strong central square. I am removing a defender of my king, relocating it to the center of the board. However, my opponent is lacking material. So the two squares that calling out are d2 and d4. E1 is not really a choice because the knight is dominated. The advantage of playing knight d2 is I am now pressuring this pawn, and black will be shackled to it one way or the other. The queen will probably have to remain with an eye on the pawn, and if the queen wants to be relieved of duty, it'll be a rook that has to defend that pawn. This knight not in a good place to defend that pawn. Not in a good place to defend it. Though it's possible. It's possible the knight can be brought in eventually to defend this pawn. Notice I have a 3-2 advantage on the queen side. That's my passport to victory. My plan now is to advance these pawns, queen all three of them, and checkmate. If black will let me. If black decides to try and stop them, okay, we'll trade attrition wise, we'll trade 2 pawns for 2 pawns, and I will get one of my pawns in. Queen has a pretty good development square now to e2, where she's safe from attack along this open d file. But that's looking ahead. The question is, what move is better? And I'm not afraid of being attacked, and I don't know if holding black to the defense of this pawn is worth it. The knight on e2 will also close off this d file where I was hoping to get some exchanges. I will have to defend that knight if black comes to the d file. Is the knight on d2 really supporting this pawn advance? And the answer is yeah, probably, because c2, c4, now this pawn, like I said, wants to go side by side, so it will eventually play b4. Couldn't in this instance. And then a knight on d2 would support that advance. I'd also put rooks behind it, rooks behind the pawns, with the long-term goal of having a rook behind the pass pawn, which is Russian schoolboy chess. So there's now the advantage of the knight in the center, of course, is the knight controls important squares on black's side of the board. It's the more aggressive move. The knight could eventually support further operations down the board instead of right away when the knight is sitting on the d5 square. The knight is going to be very hard for black to remove, since it would take 3 hops for this knight to try and offer an even exchange. No pressure on this pawn. Do I care? I can bring pressure to that pawn other ways. Maybe queen on c2. I'm going to go to the center of the board. It's pinned, sort of. My intention, though, is not to move the knight away at this time. Instead, I'm going to bring my queen to e2. Now I finally have accomplished my opening goal of connecting my rooks. This Pierre is not going to help your case at all. g7, g6 simply opens the king up to more checks. Not clear at all what black intends. Maybe black was afraid of knight to f5, not realizing that I have no further ambition to advance this knight into his position. I'm going to finish this game Russian schoolboy way, the old-fashioned way, by mobilizing a pawn majority, okay? I'm not out to checkmate you, pal. Look, there is this check here, and that's always been there. We've talked about that as a motif earlier. The square is defended currently by the knight, but I can force the knight away with tempo if I can get my pawn up to the a5 square. I really wanted to play this, so I might go here with c4, followed by a4. The backwards b pawn is temporarily supported by the knight, which is nice. Followed by a5, kicking this knight, followed by probably, if black will obviously be making moves, but followed by something maybe like b4, and now I would have pawns on these 3 squares, very advanced. I would at some point probably have to support them. I can also bring a rook to the d file, just simply because the d file always has the potential to be open. Black is controlling important dark squares, and I am not currently contesting those squares. So an advance like c2, c4 does weaken dark squares on my queen side. When you're advancing a pawn majority, I find it's usually best when you get the pawn that has the open window to the last rank, to get that pawn going first. Then if there are exchanges, you see it collapses. So there's this move. The advantage of making this move now is black can't try to play the queen into an awkward square because it's covered by the rook. There's this move and this move. Then what does black do with the knight? Most likely here. Again, dark squares. But I should be able to pass all that before he can get to the dark squares. My queen on e2 is vulnerable to this maneuver. So what I think I want to do is I want to play c2, c4, and if now black can't centralize the knight, and I can get a rook behind the pawn too if needed. So that's the plan. Rook takes. It's crazy. I guess he's desperate. It's over. It's over. It's over. Don't stop watching the video, because I still have to finish. And if you saw yesterday against Wendy, the 1500 rated bot on chess.com, you saw me have a 5-point lead. Okay, 5 pawns ahead. Lose all my pieces, and just by sheer fortune manage to queen a pawn. So what's the idea? Initially, I poo-poo it, but let's look, because there is potential complication. Well, obviously, I take the rook, right? Now, here comes his intrepid e-pawn racing down the board. I take that. There's nothing. He's got nothing. He's got nothing. My friends watching this video, chess fans, he's got nothing. He has nothing. Nothing. There's nothing. Not a sausage. Not a sausage. For a young Pierre, chess.com bot rated 1500. Not a sausage. Now he wants to give me another pawn, as if giving me 4 is not enough. He's attacking this pawn. Notice I've got them together. Either pawn can advance supporting the other. The knight, greatly restricted. That's very important when you play against knights, is use your pawns or even your pieces sometimes to restrict the enemy knight. I would almost say that's priority number 1. In my journeys with chess, I have learned that if a knight on the board is in a bad position, then your whole position is bad. And the reason for that is because the knight is a short-range piece. It only moves in short hops. So if a knight is in a bad position, it often takes a lot of time to move that knight to a better square. And that loss of time can be catastrophic and fatal. Point is, don't put your knight on bad squares. If you have a knight on bad squares and you see it, or either you or your opponent, something's wrong in the position. Something's badly wrong in the position, and it's potentially losing for the side with the badly positioned knight. It can be that bad. It can be that bad. Well, if I take, the rook is going to come now to here. The queen might double. One sort of tactical motif black has, and it's worth mentioning, is back rank mates. If somehow, I tried to interpose and my queen wasn't around, there could be a sacrifice from a rook-queen battery and it's checkmate. That's a tactical motif. He's given me a pawn. I don't have to take it. I'm already up 4 pawns. I'm not in a hurry to win. You should never be in a hurry to win. I can simply continue advancing the passed pawn, a centralized passed pawn. But we're going to take the material because you know why we're greedy. And I think Bobby Fischer said always take the material. Yeah, he wants this. He wants it. Well, I have some defenses. I do. 2 pawns adjacent. They defend each other. I can move d4, d5. d4, d5. What you going to do, Pierre? Does weaken my dark squares. I can get my queen to a dark square to kind of shore that up. Gets 1 square closer to queening. I can form a battery myself on this e file. I have the potential to check this way, force the queens off. Got to be careful though, because my 7th rank might open up to this rook. I got to get this rook into the game, and I got to get this rook into the game. I'm up the exchange, in addition to all the handful of pawns. However, I'm not in a practical sense, I'm not up the exchange because my rook isn't in the game. I'm actually down a rook right now here because of this one. And maybe even down a little rook because of this one, because there's no real reason here to be hiding behind the f-pawn anymore. I don't need the defense of my king. We're going to advance. The idea is a pawn storm. Good old-fashioned pawn storm. And there's not a damn thing Pierre can do to stop it, in my opinion. He might want to try to undermine the pawn chain, but his own knight is in the way. Notice if I play d4, d5, the knight is also restricted by his own queen. Could come here and try to blockade it. I may very well just play that. So that's what we're going to do. This is kind of a threat. He's coming back, as I suggested. Going to try to blockade the advanced pawn. I can build up pressure on the e-file. I can come down with this check. Force the queens off. Another nail in the coffin for Pierre. The more trades, the closer victory creeps for me. I can even get greedy. I can even get greedy and wonder about, can I win more material in a devastating fashion by taking advantage of this king who is naked, flapping in the breeze here on the G8 square. If I were playing for the peanut gallery, let's suppose I take the time to move my F knight, my F rook, and I put it on E1. Where's this queen going to go to try to get away from this check? Notice the knight is not so bad in the sense that it also covers the E7 pawn. Emmanuel Lasker, the world champion, and in my opinion, the greatest world champion. You can leave comments in the notes if you want. The greatest of all time, Emmanuel Lasker, said every position has a natural resistance, and we can sort of see that idea here as the knight is covering some important squares, blockading a passed pawn. It could, it could make life slightly difficult. The resistance here, though, is negligible. Let's move the F rook. We're going to play for the peanut gallery now. I'm not just going to trade off queens. This is not a bad move. The idea to attack the base, one of the base pawns, that would be fine. Actually, would develop my rook for me if I so choose. Maybe even put the rook down here on A8, pinning a knight. Again, I have this check, and now it comes at no particular cost. I wouldn't be isolating or moving my passed pawn to a more vulnerable square where it can't be easily protected by another pawn. I currently cannot advance, so as you can see, black is trying now to stop the advances. I can't advance because of the pressure here. I could do this. One other thing is I could just create Luft, which is what I might do. Luft, air, German word meaning air. Create air for my king. That means there's no more back rank checkmates, which would be a last resort desperate tactic. Since I've got such an iron grip on the position, we're going to create Luft. Now is the time to create some Luft. Here comes the knight. Problem is, I can play c4, c5. I don't know if the knight really prepared that. So let's say I play c4, c5. With, the knight maybe come to the f5 square now. It's getting a little closer to my king side. Still no real attack. Pressure reopens here. I push the pawn. Maybe he sacrifices the knight for 2 pawns. He's down further material. I trade off. I'm a whole rook ahead. It's just hopeless for Pierre at this point. Now, in MMA, cage fighting, the goal is to finish the fight as efficiently and quickly as possible. For most chess players, they want to finish the game as efficiently and quickly as possible, and they want knockout of the night bonus. They want to finish the chess game beautifully, because in the heart of every chess player is an artist, except me. I have no problems slowly dismantling my opponent, not looking for some wild queen sacrifice. Okay, not looking for some wild clean sacrifice. Not looking for a modern chess brilliancy. Takes, and takes. So that would be it. This night. Yeah, we're just gonna do it. We're just gonna kill everything. Okay. What is this doing to help you? Nothing. I can come down check. I can come down check and then double the rooks with a tempo. Where's the knight going? Perhaps here. Then rook here, check. The rooks come off. Yeah, let's take Patzer sees check, Patzer makes check. I'm playing quickly now. Very quickly. This is where I could blunder. Connect the rooks. Here comes the check. That's going to force another pair off. That's a check. He's running for some reason. He probably should have come here and tried to stop the pawn avalanche. Kick the knight. Take the pawn because we're greedy. Passed pawns must be pushed. Threaten the queen. Knight is dominated. Queen. Look for the mate. Look for the mate. Look for the mate. I'm kind of actually hindered from the beautiful checkmate by my own pawn. There's probably like a mate in 6 here, something like that. King can play ring around the rosy, pocket full of posy around this pawn, making it a little difficult for me to checkmate. I'm looking to see how I can sort of negate that. If I check with the rook, he'll come here. That check. That's mate. So we're gonna check with the rook. Now there's no more ring around the rosy. King forced to come into my house. How do I follow up here with a mate? How do I'm gonna mate him? I don't want him coming into my house. There's another check here, forcing him deeper into my house. Like I said, but he's sort of getting away. And then maybe here, queen check. Here, rook. Okay, he's dead, you know, so let's just... We're not going to get fancy here. We're not looking for the fastest mate humanly possible. We're just going to try and checkmate him by making simple moves. That is kind of funny, though. You see, chess is a beautiful game. Chess is a beautiful game. His king went, during the course of this game, all the way from its starting square on e8, look, all the way down to the starting square from my king on e1. So that is beautiful, is it not? Is that not beautiful? Is that not beautiful? And there's a fairly decent mate here too. Well, I hope you enjoyed that game. Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? I found it was entertaining. Pierre played very poorly. That's the last of the 3 1500 bots in chess.com's starting suite of advanced bots. I'm going to move on to 1600 next. 1600, I think, puts up a little more resistance. I don't expect to have problems until I'm up until about the 1900 to 2000 bot. But we'll see. Thank you. Have a great day, guys. Chess fans. Ta-ta.